I'm Christie Carson, and I'm here today with Kevin Quarmby. And Kevin and I have known each other for quite a while now,
Yeah.
8 to 9 years, and we've been involved with 3 different projects together. And Kevin's moved around a little bit, so I'm going to allow you to tell me your own institution and role at the moment, if you don't mind.
Yep. I am, in another couple of months, Associate Professor of English at the College of St Scholastica here in sunny Duluth, Minnesota, which is just the time of year. And I have traveled across the US, but you can tell that I'm not from these here parts. I'm a British, originally a professional actor, so I actually embarked on an acting career in my teens, and then worked for about 35 years as an actor before embarking on the Shakespeare Globe London King's College London Masters of Shakespearean Studies with Gordon McMullen as my supervisor. And from King's I then began teaching, went down to a 2-year feeder college for Emory University called Oxford College of Emory University, and was 5 years down in Georgia, which was very warm, and then decided to transition to a cooler climate up here in Duluth. So that's me.
Well, yes, it's unseasonably warm in Stratford today, but not in a bad way, not in a bad way. And again, one of the things that's interesting, I think, is that you've made the transition in the opposite direction to me. I started obviously in Canada and then moved across to the UK, but to do my PhD, and then stayed here for my career. So I want to go back to the beginning of our sort of association with each other, which was the Globe to Globe Festival. And you have an association with the Globe Theatre, and you were right at the beginning of that. And again, you jumped in as you are with this, both feet and happily involving yourself. What was your preparation for that? Did you know you were doing the measure for measure that came from Russia? And just give me a little bit of a snapshot of what that experience was like.
Well, and I remember we actually sat together to see the performance, which was really, really interesting. The choice or the opportunity for Measure for Measure was associated with my PhD and then my monograph project at the time, which really focused on the disguised ruler plays. So it seemed like a natural fit. However, I did not speak Russian, and I thought that was as interesting and as valid a way to approach the Globe to Globe, because the idea of the Globe to Globe opening up a global representation of Shakespeare to the rest of the world, it was as important for it not to be just the localized voices, the translated voices being heard by a small microcosm of the audience, but how these plays really sort of spoke to anyone in any language. So my association with the Globe, as you say, I was a Globe education lecturer on leaving King's and getting my PhD in 2008. I was invited by Dr. Farah Cooper to be a Globe education lecturer, working with Farah and Patrick Spottiswoode, of course. And that experience gave me a very sort of in-depth and close awareness of the teaching techniques that the Globe like to use, and then the excitement of being able to be a part of your project and to actually see a production in another language. This actually was the first Shakespeare production that I had written about that was in another language. However, for since about 2003, so we're talking about 9 years, I had been reviewing for various online journals. Most productions, if not all productions, certainly up at Stratford for the RSC and all around. So I brought an awareness and understanding of reviewing theatre. I also brought a past experience of actually performing in Shakespeare, so being a Shakespearean actor myself. And then combining all those things, review, actor, performer, practitioner, academic, deep understanding of Measure for Measure, and then the explosion of this magnificent piece on stage at the Globe, which is so memorable to this day. I have the whole production, the images of the whole production are still in my head. I can remember exactly where we were sitting and the angle that we saw things. I remember the surtitles and the way the audience, that the Russian-speaking audiences got jokes about 4 seconds before the non-Russian speakers, and there was sort of ripple of laughter and then ripple of laughter, and that fascinating interplay.
Well, and this project was supposed to be, and hopefully still will, interact with the resources that came out of that. And I've spoken to Tom Bird about the fact that in a way, there was almost a digital project alongside it, because there was a digital festival in the sense that every production was recorded and put out on the space at the same time that they were happening. And that actually did kind of get a snowball rolling in terms of audiences and in terms of engagement. But we also were part of that in the sense that we asked you to write blogs right from the beginning. And so you were one of the people who was very accustomed to that, but a lot of people weren't. So I guess I'm trying to look at the way that online resources, digital resources, have played a part in your development as a teacher, and particularly because you work with actors and you look at performing the plays, how you square that circle, or whatever you want to call it, the online and the performative. Do you think they go hand in hand, or have in your case, but do they go and do they contradict each other?
That's an interesting question. So whether the performative aspect translates comfortably to the digital, along with the pedagogy in the digital. Because I think that the question you're asking actually is a question which is vital at this moment of COVID-19, because all of a sudden the teachers, certainly the teachers of Shakespeare in college, university, school settings throughout the world, have all been forced into the digital, have all been forced into the Zoomosphere. I'm sorry?
I was just going to say that this is the difficulty with the technology already. We know each other and we can easily talk about that production in flamboyant terms. And remember, that we were sitting beside each other and that we saw it in great detail. But how close does that get anybody who's, going to try to reimagine it into that space? And
so the reimagination, this is a problematic, and this is what I perceive as problematic about these solely recorded versions. Now we have the brilliant Alexa Alice Judin's MIT Shakespeares. So we've got the global Shakespeares from MIT, and those are wonderful encapsulations of international products, Shakespeare products. There is still a limitation that I perceive, that perhaps, and I'm just thinking about it now, perhaps by incorporating, say in a teaching situation, incorporating both either blog or review, digital referencing of the text, reading as a textual interpretation, the view of one person sitting in production, viewing the production itself and looking at the text, that those looking at the text, that bringing those three elements together might give one more of a sense of the original performance. But I am not convinced, and I haven't seen a production yet in digital form which I either have seen it in real life, such as this one, or I haven't seen it all, that hasn't fully engaged me. No production has fully engaged me in a way that I'm able to feel that I know exactly what it was like to be in the theatre at that moment. And that I feel that is because as an actor, and as an actor who's performed on stage and in front of the camera, I'm very aware that the techniques involved for production of a performance are totally different. I remember Adrian Lester speaking at Stratford a few years ago. He did a wonderful Ayanna Thompson and Adrian Lester in conversation, and where he actually demonstrated on stage the techniques of being on stage and then delivering the same short speech to a camera, and the minimalization of what he was doing was astonishing. Now, when you have a camera set up for a stage performance, there's no opportunity to have the actors alter their performance. And there's no also for that sort of sense of commune that we have as an audience sitting there, which is the terrible thing that's happened to the theatre industry at this moment because of the pandemic, that we're losing so much of that community, and one wonders when that's going to return. But that is an intrinsic aspect of theatrical performance that I don't think can be captured by a lens alone. Now, you were asking about the teaching. Now, this is why I've been reading over the last few weeks lots of commentary about how useful film and filmed versions of Shakespeare are to inform student interest and engagement and understanding in a text before they actually read a text. That they are in some way able to more when they have seen a film performance. Unfortunately, it's rather like the Harry Potter syndrome. Reading your Harry Potter and then seeing the films, you can never get the film out of your head. You'll never be able to return to Harry Potter. And so unfortunately, one is likely to approach a Shakespeare play with very much that in mind as well. So that if one has seen Helen Mirren as Prospera, it might be hard for a student to engage with The Tempest without having a Prospera in mind. All those subtle sort of elements have to be brought into play.
Can you tell me about your experience? Because again, one of the things that is unique, I think, about you is that you started working in the online world across the ocean, which is the second project that we were sort of working together on in the digital, Shakespeare in the digital world, where you were working with Sheila Kavanagh. Yeah. Can you explain how that worked? Because that was a pandemic necessity. That was something you did because you wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a project that was just serendipitous. It just it came out of nothing. I had attended a conference and given a paper in Kolkata and met Sheila there. And then a couple of years later, my first time I set foot in the US was for a Shakespeare Association of America conference in 2010 in sunny Chicago, as it was on March the 31st. Very hot and sunny Chicago. And we met again. And just in general conversation, she was aware of my work at the Globe as a Globe education lecturer, also aware of my performance background, and also the fact that I've always been interested in technology. I've enjoyed exploring technology. I like playing, making mistakes, and having worked for online review sites, I understood some of the technology. The video conferencing was all very, very new, but I'd certainly been taught back at King's how to write HTML. I worked on my own website. I knew what I was doing. And so just out of chance, I sort of said, let's join together, and I could it was Skype in those days, wasn't it? Yes, I would Skype into your classes. And I'm sorry, I was thinking in the past, because we tried lots and lots of different platforms, Blue Jeans, Cisco systems. So I Skyped in as very much as you and I are talking now, as a communicator, a talking head to a class of students. Now, we joined together, we worked together as a team early on in creating a mode of teaching, which I was thinking about it and reading also what we co-wrote for the book Shakespeare Digital that you co-wrote with P. Kerwin. And the shortfalls that I perceived at the time are ones which are now even more problematic in what we are how we are teaching at the moment. The shortfalls that we perceived, there were wonderful things. So the wonderful things were allowing students in a group setting to actually embody the text. We invited them to rise onto their feet. So just like one did in any on your feet class from the 1990s and 2000s, and very especially the techniques used at the Globe, along with all the other great Shakespeare teaching establishments. So getting students on your feet, we're used to doing that in the classroom in a performative session. But to actually get them on their feet and engage with a camera lens, to engage with somebody who was 4,000 miles away in their office, and to communicate that way was interesting. That was incredibly valid. It did require, though, for it to work successfully, and I'll just quickly explain how this changed and altered when I came to work in the USA, that for one person communicating like this to a room of students that one saw in a semicircle, I personally, I was desperate to get away from the talking head situation, but I, as the talking head, could not pick up on the nuances, the body languages from a very, very poor quality, small screen Skype image.
Yes.
And it needed a faculty member, which was Sheila, on that side of the Atlantic, in Atlanta, to almost interpret some of the student interactions, queries, questions. And so that was an interesting observation, that was a limitation. Now, when I moved over to the US, we then had campuses 40 miles apart, and we created a mirror version of the group semicircle. So a group semicircle in Atlanta, a group semicircle in Oxford, Georgia, about 40 miles outside. Okay. And all of a sudden, the dynamic of two teachers, we were co-teaching. But there wasn't the opportunity to share with each other information that had been so valuable when it was a single group. It was almost, I can't describe what it was, but there was some sort of alteration in the needs of the student and of the professors that were teaching. That we all needed to be doing the same thing. So it wasn't a simple translation of what had been happening before. Now, why I specifically was thinking about this was that now we have a Zoom teaching. We have Zoom teaching imposed on us. And that problem of losing the
frozen, Kevin. Oh dear.
Are you back all right?
Yes, I am.
Good. And did you hear what I said?
You said that you got to the problem, and then it cut out.
Okay, so the problem which I see today, is that we've got the Zoom teaching. And so the problem where one couldn't see the students necessarily and needed that interpreting, you now have the Hollywood Squares student experience in front of you. New problem has arisen in that one has to acknowledge that students who may not have a good bandwidth, students who may be working from their cell phones, students who might not have the luxury of great computer access may not be able to put on their cameras. And teachers, such as myself, are embracing the fact that we may be teaching Shakespeare to perhaps 2 or 3 students, and the rest are black squares with perhaps a name, perhaps an initial. That is just as hard as that 10-year ago problem of not being able to see the faces or have that communication. So I feel that that aspect has translated into the problem of Zoom teaching today, and certainly the engagement of students. And I'm still trying to get my head around and trying to think about how I'm going to develop that in the fall, because I'm desperate to get just the same, my students actively engage, interacting, breakout rooms, so that they can edit a piece down, that they can individually perform in group sessions, but having to acknowledge that this is not everybody being in a classroom in a wealthy college. This is people being forced by distance to be all over with different technological facilities that are making this very difficult. And so the work that I did down with Emory University was invaluable for me as a teacher, but the eventual limitations meant that more work needed to be done, and I still don't think that we have found the absolute optimum of using the technology in a pedagogical way. And yet, every single faculty member, I don't know what it's like in the UK, but in the US, every single faculty member has been forced into the situation of teaching like this. And I remember when we wrote the collaborative piece for you, we were discussing what is the need? Do you need to have professors who've all got acting backgrounds? Impossible. But the reality is that every single one of us who gets in a classroom is an actor. So, you know, it's something actors don't want you to know. I mean, you know, anyone who stands up in the class is an actor. And it's just a sense of self, and it's a sense of an awareness of being able to communicate, and an awareness of and awareness is awareness of body language. You can judge a class. You can tell when a class needs to take a break. You can tell when certain members of the class are not with you. You can alter the pace of a class. Now, that is just acting.
Yes.
And I think that as much as possible, I would love my colleagues, certainly in the teaching of Shakespeare, to realize that they've all got the skills.
Well, and I think one of the things, I was just going to say, one of the things that came out of the book that we did, that Farah and I did about the Globe, was discovering that most of the people who work like you as Globe education practitioners, once they, you know, transferred from being on stage to being in the classroom, they actually realized that the Globe was very much a teaching space. Because you're all in the same light, because you have to get people's attentions, because you have to be aware of those interactions in front of you in the groundling space, and adapt to them, you know, change the pace, change the direction, change, you know, your interaction. So I think that that's one of the reasons I wanted you to contribute to this project, because you have all of those skills. But Do you think that, well, I guess I'm wondering about how your, what's your pandemic experience? You've given me a little bit of a snapshot of it. Is there anything that's come out of this experience that has surprised you, I suppose, for better or for worse?
The surprising, the surprising bit was getting a 5 out of 5 for the experience from my students, which was because I certainly, as many institutions throughout the US are possibly doing, they're inviting faculty to, certainly tenure track faculty, to have removed any reference to this past semester, because there was a potential fear that students would be destroying and destroyed by the experience. The joy of seeing that we moved to completely online with Zoom in March, so it was really mid-semester. We didn't come back from spring break, so spring break just happened and then we didn't return. I really found the process not as stressful, obviously, because I've had nearly a decade of experience of doing it. Now, that is not to say that I am not incredibly aware of my colleagues who did, but I also know how exhausting it is. So the tired state of mental, and one wouldn't believe that it was physically and mentally exhausting. But I knew that was going to happen because in 2010, in 2011, when I was doing this work from London with Atlanta, at the end of a session, it was, and I described it as an actor, it was like a first night every class. Oh. And drenched with sweat, and because you are conscious of as we are, I would imagine, conscious of our own image, how we are appearing to the student body, conscious of the potential for a recording of what mistakes we're making. I mean, it's pretty salutary. I think that any teacher of Shakespeare or any other subject, if they knew that every single class was going to be recorded, that would add a subtle nuance of pressure. But so I knew this pressure existed, and so I was perhaps ready for it. What was also important was that I must not forget how difficult it is for the students, because this is incredibly potentially hard for them. And as I said, the various technological problems that different students have. Things that surprised me were how quickly a student group who had already forged a community relationship came together in this platform. What is more problematic, I think, will be the fall, where we start teaching in this situation. How important are going to be breakout rooms, interviewing each other, getting each other into a team. I think that's going to be very hard. Positives, again, students who were traditionally seated, say, at the back of the class, wanted to escape, were very much there as long as the cameras were on. I found that textual work was, if anything, slightly enhanced. It was an interesting experience it may be that the unusual situation, or the fact that there was a lockdown, that all of a sudden work on the text was a relief from the outside world for student and faculty alike. Now, whether that will be maintained and sustained. So positives, I would say that one was able to maintain a community as long as one was already there. That is going to be something that I've really got to get my head around how it's going to change. Positives, text work and close textual reading and discussion seem to have a power. One student said to me, the things that we're discussing, I wake up in the middle of the night and they're going around in my head. That was the biggest compliment I could possibly receive. So those are positives. I do think that assessment is a major difficulty in that we cannot follow the traditional assessment routes that we had, and that is going to be something that is impacting potential the way forward. I don't know how that's going to be resolved. But then again, as long as the record button is pressed, any concerns, any questions about pedagogy, one should be able to return to the session and actually deal with any questions and queries. Great thing if a student was unwell, if the student couldn't get the technology, an email with a link to the actual session, and they were able. So there was a very real benefit of all students potentially being able to access an entire course. Sorry, that was long.
That was long and lovely, but I think you're highlighting all sorts of really important things. One is the skills that we have as teachers. The other is, I think, you know, the energy that you get back from a class, and that's why I think it's so exhausting, because you're just giving out. And I think a lot of people, as you say, are not aware of that. And I think the other thing that maybe we might actually start to be understanding just a tiny bit how the students feel, since they've grown up in a media world, in a self-conscious world. And I'm just looking at the picture of Hamlet behind you, that the picture of always being watched, always being recorded in one way or another. It's not something that we grew up with, and yet we're now encountering it in a way that the students have had from a very early age. So I think you're absolutely right that there is a real drawback in terms of creating that sense of community. I mean, all the literature that I've read always says that, like the OU, the Open University, you need to get people together, and then they make the bonds, and then they can, extend those bonds across the ether. But it's very hard to make them initially in this environment. So yeah.
You know that my undergraduate experience is Open University.
There you go.
So, and because I was able, as a working actor, to attend classes, and I was on tour attending classes in Leeds and York, and wherever I was, I was attending classes. But once a year, the Open University used to bring everybody together for the summer schools. And that bonding and being with like-minded people was so vital, because the rest of the year on your own, and that sort of motivation. Yeah.
And I think that might also speak to what you were saying about the students' intensity of attention, because normally when they come to the university, they're surrounded by so much that's new and so much that's kind of overwhelming, that the classes are just one of the many things that are sort of bombarding them. Actually, now they're in their original situation. And again, you understand this from having been on tour. You get your 1 hour with your lecturer, and boy, are you going to spend time, you're not going to waste that time. Which again, as teachers, that's a very nice shift in terms of a direct attention. Okay, I think we're running out of time, so I just want to ask you one last question, which is, if you were to give someone who's just starting out in this one tip, what would it be?
In this, one tip?
The online world. Is there something you wish you'd known before you started all of this that could make life easier for someone just starting out?
How the one thing that the one piece of advice is not to underestimate how much of your personality passes through the lens to the person receiving.
Yeah.
And so therefore, to allow that personality to pass through the lens. I was unaware of how much of me someone watching a screen could actually take away. It's like the old sort of actors training thing of in film, you don't have to act. All you have to do is think, and the thoughts will pass through your eyes. The act of thinking and the act of expressing has, it can be picked up by this astonishing little sort of lens here, and can pass so immediately. And so, yeah, really important to be aware of that, but that also should relieve some of the burden. You don't have to force your personality. Your personality will be taken by that lens and transmitted to the person who you're speaking to without you having to do extra work. That's not something to worry about. I don't know if that's a useful
No, that's absolutely fantastic, because obviously that is exactly what you've projected in our conversation, is that sense that, yes, you are enough, I suppose is the one way of thinking about it.
You are enough, yeah.
But also, you know, honest and direct communication. And I think a lot of this has helped us. You know, we're suddenly seeing people without makeup, without, you know, what people understand is...
I've not got any makeup on now.
There you go, there you go, neither do I. And so we end up with, yeah, honest intention is all you really need. A real intention to communicate, which, as you say, is acting and teaching all over, isn't it? It brings things down to the sort of the fundamentals, which I think is there's something good about that. This is something else I talked with Tom Bird about, that people, if they're going to reinvent the theater, if the theater is going to survive, people have to really answer the question, what is it for? What do we need it for? And the same is true, I think, of teaching.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you. Thank you so much. This has been
great pleasure.
really great. Okay.